So today I am joined by Liam from Reptiles and Research. So Liam, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Liam Sinclair. I'm the founder of Reptiles and Research, which is a website, YouTube channel, consultancy business, you name it, really.
So is that all you do now, or
Yeah, that's my full-time job. My full-time job is literally teaching people how to, in a nutshell, teaching people how to look after reptiles.
have you been into reptiles for quite a long time?
Probably like since 2017. So what's that? That's like seven years?
Come on, Rachel Riley.
Yeah.
7 years. So like realistically, like you've been around for quite a long time, and we'll cover obviously like your YouTube channel and whatnot later. But before obviously you started the YouTube channel, what can you tell us a little bit about like your educational background, like your journey with animals, that type of thing?
Yeah, so I did I've always like had an affinity towards animals, and that's the same spiel every single person on every podcast gives. I'm not going to mention dinosaurs. We're going to skip past all of that because let's just not do the whole thing over and over and over again. Basically, I liked animals. I went and did the degree to be a zookeeper. I did a level 3 in animal management, then went and did a bachelor's of science in applied animal science. Then I went and worked for the World Parrot Trust with their parrots at the Kiwa Centre, if anyone knows what that is. And then I did bits and bobs of helping out zoos and setting up like terrariums for zoos and stuff. And also worked in reptile shops, and I've worked in a couple of reptile shops now. And then I landed myself, started making videos, and now I've progressed on to making reptiles and research.
So, what was it about reptiles? Obviously, excusing dinosaurs, but what was it that drew you to reptiles? Like, what was the focus for you there?
But I really, really, really wanted to be like a zookeeper, right? And I did like apart from the spouts I did with parrots and stuff, I did work experience in zoos working like hoofstock and stuff. And as you just start doing work experience, you're walking around with the keeper that you're shadowing. And I was just like, well, why don't you do that and that? You've got that in the store cupboard. Why haven't you put that? And just like curiously talking as we're going through things. And then they would explain to you that like, oh, you need to fill out paperwork to request the higher ups to allow you to change like the bedding material, for example. And the priority was like um brushing a load of bedding material into a perfect neat square rather than making sure there's like opportunities with enrichment and stuff that's just lying in the cupboards. So I was just kind of like taken aback of like, or you could just get on with it and just make sure the animal has it. But no, there's this whole lengthy like process, this bureaucracy before you can even like do something simple, and I really didn't like that. So when I discovered like people are keeping a lot of the things that were in zoos at home, and then you're the keeper, you're the curator, you're this and that, and you want to do something, you can just do it. And it felt so freeing to me, that idea of just having it at home instead and doing it, that I was just like, yes, this is for me.
Yeah. So you were just like, this red tape is very boring. Let's just get rid of it. I'll do it on my own, and we'll go from there. I get that. Yeah, I get that. So when you mention like applied animal sciences, like to me that sounds like fairly broad. Like it will encompass quite a lot of different bits and bobs. But was there any like specific areas like within your studies that drew you like more to like reptiles?
It is a very broad degree. No doubt about it. It covers everything from like farm animals to like lions and tigers to the biology, the physiology, to going in. But there are like huge units on reptiles as well, and they had a huge reptile unit facility on the on-site zoo at the university I went to as well. So my lectures were literally here. The door was here, and the reptile unit. You had to walk through the reptile unit to get to your lecture hall. So you're always exposed to it. And then when you went and did lectures and stuff, or practical sessions, shall I say, you had access to like basically like entire reptile shops in different rooms. So it was a massive unit. It was really cool.
So what areas as well like of your studies have like shaped your views on like reptile care?
Animal welfare, I would say, would be the biggest one
Yeah,
that had the most
probably.
yeah, the most lasting impact on me as well. Um, Also, I'd say some of the like behavioral stuff, a lot of behavior stuff that you were like taught for just broadly about animal behavior. Um, when you are in the reptile industry specifically, and if you've just come through it from like a normal means, you don't apply the same things, even though it's completely applicable. So let's say how to measure behavior and do ethograms and whatnot. That might not even be on the radar for someone who's just bought a pet when they were 11 and then just became very, very serious about reptile keeping and like delved into this world. But that traditional, really formal academic route that I like came in with it, I transferred a lot of stuff from things that were taught broadly into reptiles. And just took my understanding. I kind of like fast tracked myself, like fast tracked my understanding of reptiles quickly. That's what I'd say is the better way of saying it.
So just before we go on to the next topic, so the reason why I wanted to get a little bit more like background and stuff like that is because in the grand scheme of things, like you are relatively a newcomer, like in the hobby, but you have made a fairly substantial impact, I would arguably say, for better or worse, depending on on who you ask. But so that's the educational side of it. But what other experiences have you had other than your education? Like what other like practical like on the job stuff? So I know you mentioned a bit about like shop work and like zoos and stuff, but could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so like the practical side of like working in shops and stuff, like obviously luckily I worked in quite a couple of shops, and it's always had like a really diverse array of like species as well. So I've worked from like everything from like the big blue cyclura. I've worked with the croc monitors. I've worked with venomous. I've worked with rattlesnakes. Worked with tremosaurus. Worked with eyelash vipers. Worked with crocodilians. It's a long list. I could keep going. But I have also worked with like all the racks and stuff. Like I've experienced it like in a day out and day out situation. So I have experienced a lot of it at quite an intense amount in a short period of time. Well, I say short period, it's not short anymore, but compared to like, oh, I got it when I was 11 and I've been doing this ever since. Yeah, no, I haven't been keeping for 30 years. I've not been alive for 30 years, but yeah, it's just got to do a lot really intensely, really fast.
Yeah, so that's kind of like another thing that I definitely wanted to kind of get out there. What like not everybody would like understand. Like, okay, so this bloke's been around for like arguably a short amount of time compared to quite a lot of the old crusties and stuff. So what experience has he got? You know, so I just thought I best get it out there. So you've basically done quite a lot of different bits and bobs in terms of jobs. You've not just worked in zoos where arguably the welfare of animals is a lot higher in some aspects. You've also done shop work stuff where a lot of the time a lot of welfare issues can arise, like you're saying about like racking systems, things going wrong, that type of thing. So I think it's quite interesting. So, moving on to the next topic, which is in fact your YouTube channel. So, I feel you've gained quite a significant following, to be quite fair. So, other than obviously like the red tape kind of stuff of wanting you to do it on your own, what other things would you say has inspired you to go forward with your YouTube channel?
I would say taking that, so you kind of have like information that everybody knows. And so there's a broad pyramid, right? And the base of this pyramid, you've got like a thermal gradient, a basking lamp, or like, give them humidity based on this care guide. They're very broad. And then you have a lot of stuff that's like up in this like peak of this pyramid that is all the advanced knowledge that everyone has that actually has explanations for simple things that people struggle with at the base of this pyramid. But I find that the way people that are in this advanced community, that are up in this pyramid, don't describe things in a way that helps the layman, that helps people understand. It's like reading like the back of the chemical composition of an apple sort of thing. And they're just there like, what are you trying to say to me? So I really like taking these advanced concepts and then rephrasing them or re-explaining them in a way that is really easy to understand, so that you can take and drip these advanced concepts down to beginners and start fixing mistakes or things that people don't even realize that are problematic, and allowing people to take it and run with it. And the best thing I've seen is people that have been with me for a while following. I've seen people that just came into keeping after me, got taught by me, and have actually gone past me. I would say there's quite a few people that have got amazing enclosures that I would say, and amazing care, that I'd probably say is better than my own at this point. But so I really enjoy like taking that stuff and bringing it back down to people down here in a way that's easy to understand.
Yeah, so I think that's been the issue for quite a long time, within like keeping reptiles like as a hobby, type thing. I don't like referring it as a hobby, but I'm going to just for semantics kind of thing. But yeah, I think that's been the issue for quite a long time, and I think that's where we've seen quite a lot of folklore husbandry and poor welfare practices being perpetuated, because that information was in fact there, but it just wasn't that accessible for like the people on the ground that are keeping them as pets, etc., etc. So yeah, well done. But in terms of like content creation and ideas and stuff, what's the thought process? Like, how do you come up with like an idea and then run with it and then create it? So, like, what's the process?
I consider myself a utility channel, not a personality channel. So I don't want to be a pet tuber. I simply want to be like a place of utility, how to, education, get what you need from me, and then go away and use it. And it's great that people like follow along and like stay with it for the next thing that I might put out that they can use. But I don't, I'm not really phased about like whether you follow me. I just want to be systematically utility and educational resource. So I typically will just look for what are the pain points that people have in herpetoculture. How can I take that, produce something really easy, explain it, and then put it out there. So one that comes out in search and in Google search and things like that, people find naturally. And if someone that knows better and wants to articulate to someone else how to do it better, but they don't necessarily know how to articulate it in an easy to understand way, they can just be like, take that link. He's done it quite well. Watch that. So I'm providing resources for others to actually help others as well. And I've seen that used quite a lot. Quite a few Facebook groups have like taken a lot of my videos and just ran with them.
But like the ideas themselves, like how do you like come up with the idea? Are you like looking at, I don't know, like maybe like statistics of, okay, so leopard geckos have got poor welfare because of this, so I'm going to do a video on that? Or is it just what's trending? Is it a mixture of column A, column B, or A another? What is it?
It's a mixture. I mean, there's obviously like what you know about what people think by being ingrained and in the middle of it all. And you just know that I want to tackle that topic because I want to try and address that and fix that, or at least contribute to the slow inching forward of fixing that. Or simply you can just look at what people are searching for online and just make videos for what they're searching for. Like one of the main things is I look at a beginner and they're like, okay, how do I set up my bearded dragon? It's like, okay, a literal video, how to set up my bearded dragon, or how do I clean up after my bearded dragon? Like really simple things that people that are like really integrated and in the middle of like herpetoculture or the hobby or whatever you want to call it, don't even think of it because it's like obvious. You just like clean the poop away. But
Yeah.
some people are like, how do I put it in the bin? The bin's going to smell. Do I chuck it in out back? Do I flush? Really, really simple things I find a lot of people asking for help with, but no one has thought to, apart from people that we know, has like thought to like help with that. So I'm also doing the advanced stuff, but I'm also making the really, really bare bones. Just basically the play. I want to be a resource center that just like if they're like, oh, I don't know. If someone's like, I don't know about that, let's go see if Reptiles and Research has got it in our house. They're like, oh, just like so useful. That's what I want to be.
What a useful piece of meat. Right then, so getting on to the next topic, still obviously like surrounding YouTube and whatnot, but it's controversial views. Now, since we've been friends, you have been involved with and sparked quite a lot of debate within the reptile community in terms of how how you view things. Can you elaborate a little bit more on on your stance on how to keep reptiles, reptile ownership, that type of thing?
But I don't particularly view myself as controversial. Like I know that like there might be some people that like do, but like again, like I said previously, I came from learning all this stuff and then transplanting it onto reptiles. And I find that I in the past have said something and people are like, whoa, 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 that's not what we do here. And then like what, we're 4 years on now, people are saying it, and it's just like, but they don't remember that, oh yeah, Liam said that now. And oh, okay, maybe like maybe next time we'll like not react like that. All they remember is that they felt that I was controversial 4 years ago, but then they're not even remembered what it was. So it's just a perpetual loop of like bringing things in. Like I said, I'm bringing things down from here to here, but because they're like, no, 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 each time I do that, where there's like a delay of like, oh, that's controversial. I remember him being controversial like last year, and then now they're actually saying what I said. Like, it's a pain. But no, anything I say, I make sure that I have evidence for. Like the whole point of like academia and stuff is like you say something in like a paragraph and you have to have a citation for that to even like, be able to say that in a paper or whatever. So when I'm talking about like snakes and UVB, like there are substantial papers saying what it does in the blood and what it does to the systemic effects or just the science is there. So all I say is a lot of the times they say it as my view, and actually I just tell someone what actual science is. So and I'm like, yeah, yeah, give it to your snake, and then like, well, that's controversial. I'm like, but that's what the science is.
Yeah, but I mean, to be quite fair, obviously you said you don't feel the controversial, your views and stuff like that. And personally, to me, I don't really think that they're that controversial. But the reason why I thought it poignant to talk about it is because of the backlash that I have personally seen, you get, and where the community can sometimes take a bit of a turn. So obviously, with getting threatened, etc., that type of thing. I mean, it's happened more than once. I mean, like I said, I don't personally think that your views are arguably that controversial, and I agree. It's quite funny to see a couple of years down the line that trickle down effect where you've said something, and then most people have then gone and started to do it, and then started to get results and stuff. But you kind of touched on a little bit, which was my next question. What are the biggest misconceptions people have about you? I'll go first. I think a lot of the times when I see people talking about you and stuff like that, they call you an auntie. So, do you want to explain that a little bit?
And what I think happens is that I'll say something like, we need to give snakes more space. Or if I say something like, there is research to show that snakes should be allowed the ability to stretch their spine out, right? So they have an enclosure that's the length of them. Now, if you look at the Mader's veterinary journals and like the actual what horticulture itself and what keepers of reptiles are publishing in vet journals, it's like snakes that don't get the chance to stretch out can experience things like colonic discomfort, or if it's extreme examples of a snake that's constantly like tightly coiled and it's that packed in, they can get like fused vertebrae. Like this is like things that are literally science. So me saying things like that, I know some people that have got like a big collection of animals and maybe they're like doing a business and they see me saying things like that and their mind instantly goes to, okay, so if he starts to saying like that and people listen, then he's going to change how people think, and like loads of people are going to start doing it, and suddenly like I'm gonna have like it's gonna impact me negatively, like financially, and things like that happen. And then people start saying, "Oh, he's an anti," because I have standards that they don't necessarily agree with. But I
Yeah.
always make sure that the standards that I say are based in the actual science and the reality of welfare science. So to call me an anti, I don't understand because I've got like how many reptiles behind me now, and I bought wild caught snakes the other month, so I don't understand how you can call me an auntie when you see me in a video with a load of snakes behind me.
Yeah, and the fact that it's literally like your job. Like if you were an anti to the point of no one is allowed to keep reptiles anymore, then essentially you would potentially be out of a job.
My entire job is to teach people how to take care of reptiles. So therefore, I am incentivized to protect my interests and to make sure that people are still keeping reptiles. And actually, the more people that are keeping reptiles, the more money I will make because the more people require help. Simple as that. So for me to call me an auntie when I actually rely upon people to keep reptiles to pay my bills, it makes absolute no sense. Sometimes I feel like rather than say like, well, I just disagree with him, it's like let me just slap a label lazily and be like, then I'll attack that label that I've placed on him rather than just say I disagree with what you're saying. And I'm like, okay, cool. If you disagree with what I'm saying, you also disagree with the people who wrote the papers, then you actually need to take it up and refute and disprove their papers scientifically, not me just telling you that the papers exist. But because I am the person speaking, their anger is directed towards me.
It's extremely tribal and can be extremely tribal, can't it? But yeah, so I think it's quite tribal. Like you were saying, like these people just will just slap a label, slap a label on it, basically. But how have you dealt with like the backlash or like the criticisms and stuff of the reptile community?
That makes it sound like every single person's like, whoa, and there's actually like a small cluster of people that are like offended by me saying something that to a lot of beginners coming into keeping reptiles with no prior like dogma in their heads, they're like, that makes sense. So it's just like a few people that are like, whoa, man, rather than like everyone's like the ground shaking. Like it's not like that. In terms of dealing with it, I have, if it's other creators, like Mutation Creation, um, made comment on me once, and I obviously responded and like disputed and refuted what they were saying. And I find that worked quite well. In terms of like just generic people in the hobby. I just crack on and do my job. And if someone's already set in their views, it's not my intention to help them anyway. I'm helping the people that want help on how to learn how to keep reptiles.
Yeah, like to be fair, that was one of the points that I was going to touch on. That when when we hear these things, it sounds like it's the whole community having a pop. When realistically, 99% of the people that actually keep reptiles have not got a clue who these like tiny 1% are that are wanting to hold back welfare standards, etc., etc. And I think these people do need to realize that we love reptiles. We are going to try and upset the status quo because we want to do better. And that's the whole point, isn't it? That's the whole point of animal keeping is you want to do better. But what can you tell me like a positive? So we've covered negative, all right. So I think let's just do away with the negative side of things. Let's move on to more positive things. So what is out of the? Because how long have you had the channel for now? Was it 2021 since you've had it?
2020.
2020. So you've had it for nearly 5 years. So within those nearly 5 years, what is like one of the most positive things, like positive community interaction, like you've had, or explain like a couple?
I said the biggest recent one was the fact that we went and spoke at the Nordic Reptile Symposium over in Denmark this year. And then we're also doing Netherlands next year and then Japan the year after. There was something like Canada. But I mean, like when it's that far ahead, I'm like, yeah, I'll do that, and I'll worry about actually emails back and forth like in years to come. But like traveling around and like speaking at events, and people just taking it and using it, like that's really cool, and that's what I set out to do. Really, is to like be a resource. And also, like I said, like a previous example, like people that have like taken what's on the channel and have just gone on to do other things with it. and or like the Facebook groups that use it as resources for how they can convey things to their members and stuff. So like it's having like a ripple effect outwards, and yeah, I really enjoy that. Or like if I go somewhere and someone recognizes me and I'm like, oh, actually, I used your video to do this. Like recently, we went to pick up some skinks for someone recently, and we went to someone's house and they opened the door and was like, oh, I know you. I saw you on YouTube. And then they were like, oh yeah, I used your video to do this and this and this. So like that's really cool. Like it's becoming the resource that I intended it to be. So that's the cool thing.
Like, don't talk to me, I'm famous.
No past, please.
No paps, please. Christ.
um, I like that. So it's like the small little like human interactions as well. Like for me at the shop, like obviously I don't really impact that many people like on like a daily basis. I don't have a big as reach as you do, but what like does it for me is when people come in and they're like really thank me and they're like, oh, thank you so much for helping me out with this, that type of thing. So I prefer like the smaller human like interactions as well. But yeah, so can you share an example of a discussion or like a debate that you've had with like other reptile enthusiasts that's like impacted you or like impacted your views in any way?
Trying to like come up with some like really poignant answer like on the spot. But no, I'd say Ellie has like impacted my views the most. Like there's a lot of things that Ellie has taken from the like the behavioral world of like working with like dogs and stuff, and like I've used it in so many instances of like training and things like that. Like I put a video recently of like training the snakes or training the bearded dragons, and then I can go to a different country and talk about how we can use these training techniques to like improve like the welfare of our animals and things like that. So I'd say Ellie has had the biggest impact upon me. I'd say conversations with like Laurie Torini has been impactful in terms of like individual conversations where I've been like, whoa, I can't really think at the moment. But I mean, I remember the individuals who have had the biggest impact upon me. Yeah, Ellie, Laurie Torini, Tom Griffiths, definitely. There were some concepts like years ago that I really struggled to understand when some people, again, like I said, like reading the chemical composition of an apple. Some people would explain it to me like that, and then Tom had the ability to explain it to me in a different way, and I was like, got it, makes sense. To be fair, there's loads of people. Like, how long we got?
All for like different things or for like similar reasons or
Like Tom is like lighting. Laurie's like cooperative care techniques and fear free and the welfare, and obviously Ellie is very similar like, in that depth of like welfare science and like behavior science and cooperative care. I'd say yeah, all for different reasons. Like even people like breeding wise or like establishing like the wild caught snakes I got, like Francis helped a lot with that. And different people have like different aspects to like help. I think it's really useful to like even like on the like, king snake groups, like I will still listen to people that don't keep in a way that I approve of, but there's that one thing they say that like I'll take and use. So I feel like even though I don't like the tribalism, so even though like someone's like not something you'd approve with or ever recommend to someone else, but you could take that one thing that they've said and use it. So I think that being able to have a conversation without being like, oh, they're the enemy. Now we go to war with this tribe, and it's just a bit like silly. A lot of stuff of the controversy that you say was a lot of that, like, okay, they've said something that I disagree with once now, therefore they're the enemy in this war. I'm like, what are you talking about?
yeah, and then they kind of like double down and whatnot, and it just gets murky and messy. And yeah, at the end of the day, we all want to keep reptiles, and you can have a difference of opinion, and that's absolutely fine to do so. You know, it'd be a boring world, wouldn't it, if everybody had the exact same like opinion on everything? There'd be no chance for change whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like, it's hard because like I remember when I first started, like I would literally argue with people for days, like a comment thread on like especially the king snake groups, like I had an argument with someone, and then like we were still doing it like 3 days later. And I look at that now, I'm like, that is someone that has been doing it in a certain way, like keeping snakes in a box full of pine shavings with a water bowl, and that's ambient with no heating or anything like that. And it's just like that's what they're going to do. I was never going to change their mind, no matter what science I put in. Like I was wasting my time. But like, yeah, like I would argue night and day about things like that. And now I'm just like, well, my video is not for you. I'm here to help the beginners. And then like the realization that I had is that what is the point is trying to convince someone that's decided a very long time ago, made their mind up, or I can just teach someone off the bat. Let's say Sarah is getting into snakes. She's never kept before, and I say, oh yeah, you want to give it UVB because it does raises the 25 hydroxy D in the blood. It increases endorphins in the skin cells in reaction to UVB. It's calming, it's soothing, it's pleasurable. And I just mention it at the same sort of standardization of like, yeah, and you want to give them a thermal gradient. You want to give them a water bowl, just like it's normal. And I realized that people that were like, right, I'm going to say this. This might be controversial, but I think snakes need UVB. And in actuality, it isn't controversial. It's just like the industry is lagging behind. So just talking about it as normal as it actually is, many beginners are just like, yeah, okay. And I can literally see that because I can see them go to like Amazon links. I can see what everyone buys, and they all are buying like everything that I recommended after I made the video. So they're like, okay, cool, shopping list, bought it. It's that simple with the beginners. When it's people that are ingrained, it's not really my priority anymore.
Yeah, and I think recently, I'd probably say over the past like year, 2 years or so, I've seen a lot less combativeness from quite a lot of people from all sides, to be quite fair, because I think we now just realize that let's just do our own kind of like thing. Like, for example, like the beginner stuff, like I'm very much with you. Like, we're a shop, we cater for beginners, we don't really cater really for like hobbyists and stuff like that, because hobbyists will interact with hobbyists. Like, that's just the thing. My view is, okay, let's get this fresh mind, let's just normalize these things, like obviously UVB with snakes and stuff like that. But I mean, I think as time goes on, I think it is becoming less and less of a controversial topic, which I'm very, very pleased about. But another thing that I wanted to kind of touch on was the word ethical. So I've seen it being bandied around quite a lot. It's in a lot of legislation and stuff now, so like ethical considerations. But what do you believe are like the ethical responsibilities of like new and old reptile keepers?
Animal ethics as a study, like ethics is like the collective um understanding or definition of right and wrong. And then like morals as an individual one. So like we would say collectively, ethically, as like a nation, we would say murder is wrong. But a serial killer's morals are like, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. So their morals doesn't reflect the ethics of where they are. So ethics is like the collective understanding of right and wrong, and then morals are like an individual one. And then you can have different morals, but like, so this is where people use ethics, and they're like, well, is that ethical? And it's like, I wouldn't say like young and old are any different in terms of like their ethical responsibilities. I would say their ethical responsibilities is not to cause suffering, not to cause harm, um, not to be cruel to animals, to recognize animals as the sentient individual beings that they are. And there'll be straight away someone will be like, because I said that about, oh, that's fluff, and it's like that's the science. The science is they have emotion, they have individuality, they have sentience, and then that goes into like the anthropomorphism and the mechanomorphism thing that I teach. But yeah, I would say like the recognition of that to not like abuse them basically. Yeah, I would say like I don't think that new keepers have any more responsibility than old keepers. I would say that it's the same.
Mm.
Whether you recognize it or not is different, but that doesn't mean it's any different. Like you're just not recognizing it.
Yeah.
I get what you mean. I get what you mean. So
Answered that really like long-windedly.
so how can like the reptile community in general? Okay, this is a very open-ended, a very open-ended question. How can the reptile community balance personal preference from reptile and animal well-being, or is there no compromise with that whatsoever? Do you feel? The reason why I ask it is because obviously how we would like what we were discussing earlier in terms of okay, you disagree with how someone that you interacted with on a king snake group keeps their animal. So, you know, is there a balance to be struck with that, or like is it just a case of well they do their thing and we do our thing?
Well, the thing is the reality. Like you might be like, my preference is to keep in a really, really small, let's say I've got like a 2 foot deep or three, a 90 centimeter deep rack, right? And I've got newspaper and a water bottle. And I'm keeping it ambient, and that's my preference. And I have a a 5 foot snake in there. And if you were to, let's say you were to set up a video recording of that snake, and if that snake was like probing and pushing its head and it's constantly like moving against the side, someone might recognize that like, oh, it's just being active. When you actually understand the behavior science and like the welfare science, you actually look at the animal and you're like, that animal is trying to change its circumstance. So a behavior is just something they do to either achieve reward or avoid punishment, right? So either something outside that enclosure that they find rewarding, or they find the circumstance they're in punishing, right? So, and then if you were, and especially if there could be like, oh yeah, I'm defrosting rats, that's why. I'm like, okay, great. But if you're noticing that over the long run, just constantly, and it's like, okay, and you open that rack and it comes straight out without knowing the science, like as just a normal person, you look at them like, okay, the snake wants out. I mean, there is a degree of like, well, at some stage, it just wants out. Like even it could be in a 7 foot viv, and if it's like a 7 foot snake, it still might be like, I want more room. But then you start asking yourself the questions of like, okay, so do I want to keep that species if I find it really difficult to achieve that versus like, oh, I'll keep a 3 foot snake in like a 4 foot viv, and it's like doesn't do as many of those behaviors. So again, I'm talking about the reality. The reality is that's happening. No ifs or buts. That happened in front of you. So it isn't a case of, oh, we'll do our thing, you do I. I'm like, the reality is happening. That's the science. That's what's happening in front of you. That's the welfare. So that animal, if that is the case, and you can determine that it just wanted out, that animal will be feeling feelings of frustration. And if it's long term in a kind of depressed like state of like lethargy, and it's like, well, I've got nothing to do, so I just lie here, sort of thing. And then it's desperately trying to get out at the same time. You know that if it does that at a certain point, it's goal motivated as well. So let's say you've left a crack in the rack, right? And the drawer's open by that. And the snake doesn't have enough force or strength to force its way out of that, but it's trying in that gap over and over and over again. That's goal motivated. You can see what it's trying to do. It's not like mindless, like stereotypy, like pacing for the sake of pacing, for example. And even then, the current understanding of welfare science is a lot of stereotypies are an attempt to cope. So let's say you've got a tiger in like a small enclosure, right? And then was like, oh, a tiger's just pace. A tiger might feel frustration of like it wants more space, for example, or there's a resource elsewhere that it's trying it wants, or any reason, and it's feeling the need to pace. And then eventually that becomes an attempt to cope. And that was like self-soothing. In the same way that let's say you're waiting on really bad news or really good news, and like it's like paramount to your life, you might start pacing out of anxiety whilst you're waiting. But if someone were to like grab you and stop you from pacing, you would get like frustrated because you are using that as an attempt to self-soothe and cope. So even if let's say you change the animal circumstance, I'm going on like a rant now, But let's say you got like an elephant that rocks because it wants to like just exert itself and like and walk a certain distance. If it starts rocking and it's attempt to cope, that becomes a habit. And then even if you gave it a massive field, it would still rock because that's now ingrained in it. And it's just what the animal does, like like to self-soothe. So all that is like the science that exists and how we understand the current understanding of welfare science and how we deal with like animals in zoos and whatnot. And then you have the reptile industry, and someone's like, bullshit, mate. And you're like, well, the reality is this is happening. So to be like, oh, we'll do our thing one way, we'll do it this way, it's just like, well, okay, you cause that to happen to the animal. That's on you. So the way I see it is we just push forward, we move forward, we educate people in the right way, and eventually you start shifting. And let's say you've got some old boys that are like just don't want to read science, want to live in this bubble. People learn and then they don't update. So let's say someone went and did like zoology in like the 70s. They're like, I know what I'm talking about, and they carry on with I know what I'm talking about for the next 30 years. And when the new people come out of like universities and stuff, and they know what's been currently taught, they haven't kept up with it and learned it, even though there's papers that they're teaching to the new people were actually published in the 90s, but they've not carried on reading in the 90s. So you have these people that are just never going to change, and a lot of times I think we're just waiting for like a generational tick over as well. So I don't think it is a case of you do it one way, we do it the other. It's like, well, that's the reality, and we're just going to crack on pushing forward, and then it's probably going to end up being like legislation that that ends up dealing with that bottom of the barrel stuff that isn't moving forward.
The L word. The L word. Legislation. Crikey. We're on to that already. So, obviously, with before we had obviously the discussion about your little rant about obviously like the science and stuff like that, which I found quite interesting. But before we were kind of like talking about, okay, well, we're more for beginners, and then the old guys are gonna do the old thing. But then we're kind of at a juxtaposition of the conversation that we've just had about, well, we can't really let them do that thing because they're causing like suffering potentially to the animals. So you mentioned legislation. So I know quite a lot of different pieces of legislation have been like proposed and stuff like so things like positive lists or like white lists, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of like misinformation on both sides, I would say, of the pro keeping and then anti keeping. So from somebody that is quite level headed and can see like both sides of the argument, like, what do you think is the best way to progress moving forward in terms of legislation? If you were in charge of it, that is.
If I was in charge of legislation, I know that most people after if they are one of those people that are like, oh, that's controversial, and or the oh, Liam's an anti, they will be like, oh yeah, he's gonna be like, oh, ban this, ban that. What I would actually do is say, where do we want to be in 20 years' time, and what are the small steps that we put in place to gear ourselves up and move in that direction and help people move along. Because at the same time, you people I say I might not agree with. I would never put my snakes in racks, but that is still someone that's got kids, got family, got bills to pay, and that is that business. How can you have to like that is unfair to be like you can't do that anymore. Off you pop to Tesco's. So you you need to be like, how can we progress and like move things in a direction and a 20-year plan of like simple things that are going to move us into the direction of where we want to be. So simple things now that are pretty like people might consider meaningless, but I think would be steps that build the foundations of what we want to be in 20 years' time. So, for example, like the animals activities license, one of the main hang-ups for people that are breeders that breed at home is that if you got your AAL, which is fine, your address will be listed public because that's the way any business is, like tattoo parlors, like blah blah. So I would wonder whether we could like the people that are like doing lobbying and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, I protect and keepers' interests." I would be like, "Well, how do we like build the foundations?" Like I said, maybe we can lobby for. Let's get an amendment to the AEL and say AEL like B, but it's like the council knows. your address, and when they want to send a vet round, then the vet is like given your address. So people don't have their addresses made public. So like little things like these little minor inconveniences that are like barriers to people actually doing the right thing, right? It is the right thing to get an AEL, make sure that you are, vet inspected, you're paying your taxes and all this stuff. But you're actually punishing people for doing the right thing. You're punishing people for getting the AEL and having their address listed publicly. Or let's say you are also someone who's like content creation like me. I don't want my address listed public, so therefore I don't breed because of that. But that's a barrier for a lot of people. So you're punishing people for doing what you want them to do, but then you're actually making it harder for them for doing the right thing, and you're incentivizing people to just do things that you don't want them to do. So I actually think it would be a lot better for the economy. Like you're a shop owner, so one of the main gripes I hear from shops is that someone can breed a load of animals in like their spare bedroom and then undercut shops and sell and flood the market at like a really cheap price that like make it really difficult for shops to make a living. And at the same time, the way that the industry works in the UK at least is the shops are these centers where they're taking the rescues, like even the NCRW, like I believe the way it's set up is that things go to shops and then shops send it to the NCRW or something like that. So, but even shops taking a lot of rescues, and the way that the money used to work with Reptile is that like there used to be like a bit on top of live food that went to like Reptile or whatever. Again, it might be different now. I don't know, but if we are saying like the shops are the backbone of the industry in the UK, it makes sense to encourage people and breeders to be AL licensed so that you're at the same level playing field with a shop you're competing with. It is unfair for you to be able to flood the market at a really cheap price, breed at a really cheap cost with none of the overheads of a shop, and then be like, well, the shops should have done something about this legislation that I don't like, or the industry should have done something. So I actually think the ecosystem would be very, very healthy if people were to be encouraged to get their AALs. So I think that like again, a lot of the things with the welfare crisis of a million bull pythons existing in the UK, you have the problem of the breeding for morphs, then you get things like normals pop out, and then they just get like spread around, and we have an overabundance of royal pythons right now. They are really, really cheap to produce, and the demand doesn't match the amount that's being produced. So if people did have the AELs, they would have to abide by minimum standards, which actually by the AEL isn't that much. I've looked at it, it's not that big. Far less than what I would say for like a pet keeper. So if you abide by that, what means is that people would be producing, breeding and producing less animals, and they would be selling them, and then have to sell them at a higher amount to recoup their losses, which means that higher cost put out means that pet keepers would be like, I'm not paying that when there's like a load in that rescue over there. I'll get one way cheaper or even for free. So they'll go in, absorb all the rescues, and suddenly like it all stabilizes because you don't have like the influx of a load of rescues sitting there devaluing what you've got here. So actually things begin to like level out, right? Ecosystem wise. And I feel like a lot of the problems are from us just not wanting to do things in a proper manner.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and then again, let's say I'm like rah 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 anti. Why are you keeping in racks? Why are you breeding in racks? Your response is, hang on, mate. I'm keeping and abiding by my licensing. I have a vet come round every blah 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 and have my animals vet checked. If you have a problem with the dimensions that I'm using, take it up with the AAL, right? You suddenly you're like, can't moan at me, mate. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm
Hmm.
abiding by the rules. So, and then what if in the flip scenario to that, what if I was that person, what do I have to say to that? I'm like, okay. And then you have to provide substantial evidence to inch that AL forward. Now, I agree that there are people that do have views of abolition. So they're animal rights abolitionists that believe that they can like influence things to get things banned. Yeah, I agree with that. I recognize that, and I don't agree with that. But at the same time, I think people think that they have a lot more sway than they do, rather than because I've had conversations with people that are in positions of like DEFRA and stuff, and like talking about a potential someone that people fear as like an anti, and they're like, oh bloody hell, that guy again. So they don't take them seriously. But I think that a lot of problems of like the standards needing to be raised is because that people aren't keeping to a high enough standard. If we truly want to be like self-policing, yeah, if we're self-policing, self-managing, why aren't we raising the standards so that we're at a point where like you look at it and you're like, I can't really say much. And there's always gonna be aunties that are like the ethical belief of like captivity is wrong. Well, that's a different thing of being like it's in a box and it's like trying to get out. You can't stretch a spine out and it's got like colonic discomfort. Like there are the very, very like clear and evident things that you can be like, I can tear that apart. If you can get to a point of like very, very difficult to argue with it. But I've got a 3 foot king snake and a 7 foot viv with halogens, with LEDs, with T5s, with different textures, different smells, different opportunities. Like it's very, I would argue it's very hard to be like, he's abusing the animal than it is to be like, that's in a tiny box with that's in a filing system. That's how I keep my paperwork. So it's just the apart from the welfare science and all the reality of what's actually happening, the optics are bad as well. So I don't know. I just feel like legislation wise, like I think you got to make sure that it's not overbearing to the point of like it's ridiculous. Like that one that came out where it was like they need to have massive requirements in shops. That was ridiculous. But I think like saying snakes should be able to stretch out isn't really. Could you imagine if you had a dog in a crate and it was like 75% of the length of the dog, and the dog's constantly like crunched up? You would be like, "What are you doing?"
Stop that! Stop that now!
I hate the attitude of, oh, we're all reptile keepers, so if that person over there is doing something dodge, we don't criticize it, and we for fear of like giving an ammunition. We've got dogs in this house. If I know someone down the road is beating their dog, or they've got dogs in like that situation, like I said about like a really small cages, and they're actually like suffering, no part of my brain goes, but I've got dogs. I can't I can't report that. Loads of people have got a dog, and if they saw someone like keeping a dog in like awful conditions, they'd report it. So why is the attitude for reptiles any different?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with that. I mean, when it comes to just to touch on earlier what we were the initial thing about legislation. So what you're saying is basically just do it in slow incremental changes and have like a 5, 10, 20, 25 year plan and just slowly like bring it up and stuff. I mean, I agree. I completely agree. I mean, we've not bred royal pythons in this shop now for this will be the 4th year on the trot because we're inundated with rescue baby royal pythons. And it's devaluing the ones that like we had bred, you know, because like people are because obviously we only offer like just a rehoming fee like for them, like because they need to go, like they need new homes, and some of these animals again have been kept in arguably barbaric conditions even by like snake rack breeding standards, like very poor. I mean, this year already we've had 4 local breeders give us their whole entire collections because they can't shift them, they can't do this with them anymore. We've had recently somebody breed one of our rehome bearded dragons that we explicitly said don't breed this dragon because it's got neurological issues. They signed the paperwork to say they won't breed it. They've gone out and they've bred it, and there's now I think the person bred like nearly I think over 100 of these bearded dragons, some of which have subsequently died and they've had to replace them and stuff because customers have like come in and stuff like that. And the setups that they've gone out in, the person didn't check them, they just thought, oh yeah, 40 quid chairs buy. And some of the setups that the animals have come to us in have been absolutely appalling. So I do think breeders in general should have an AAL. It's not like It's not like a dog where a male's accidentally caught a female and she's now pregnant and that's it. For the most part, for like oviporous reptiles, you need to incubate those eggs. You can't accidentally have a clutch of eggs. Oh, they've all hatched. Like, unless it's a cresty, arguably. But you know, things like bearded dragons, royal pythons, etc., etc., things that do need that incubation time. That'll hopefully reduce that quite a lot.
I don't like is the attitude of like, well, I'm a reptile keeper too, so I need to, I feel the need to like not cover it up, but like not report things or not be like not be like that is unacceptable because I'm a reptile keeper too. Because what that implies is that there's something inherently wrong about what we're all doing because of like we're one and the same. And it's like I'm not doing anything wrong. Like that person over there that's like leaving things without water and it's like an actual abuse case. That's wrong. But wait, like putting yourself in the same basket as that implies that you are inherently doing something wrong. It's like you are ussing it when
Yeah.
it's like so yeah, well that in that example, that person, if that person had an AEL and they abided by all the things and they provide their AEL number, they would be held responsible as an entity for their duty of care and how they're operating. I do feel like if people had like a breeder's license or a AL type 2 license where it's like your address isn't public, it's known to only your council, and then they get up to the vet inspections, I think it's perfectly acceptable for you to have to abide by minimum standards. And I know currently the minimum standards of the AL is like it needs to be 75% the length of the snake's length, and then it's like one third, and there's not even a height requirement. So it's like really low requirements, in my opinion.
We could pick apart the AL at a later date.
I would I would definitely make it more accessible to people that are going to breed. And I think that if you're going to be doing something like is basically like a business, you're making that much money, you're doing like a business, you should have like a breeder's license. But like again, it needs to be made more accessible. There's a lot of hurdles that stop a lot of people. But apart from the fact they want to hide tax money, apart from that, and that's an individual's decision, there are plenty of people that would be very, very okay with breeding their reptiles, selling them, and then just doing a self-assessment and just paying the tax. It's the problem of the licensing that punish you for not doing the right thing in aspects.
With the AL, I think it goes too far in areas that I feel it shouldn't really go that far into, compared to areas it doesn't go far enough with, in my opinion, in terms of the actual animal's welfare. So there are like issues like with it, like what you were saying, for example, as well, like the height requirements and stuff. I think as well because these things aren't species like specific either. So, but I suppose this goes back to what you were saying about slow incremental changes, like to the actual license and AL itself. But I think just to close off on the AAL and licensing and stuff like that, because me and you have had conversations in the past about this that have literally lasted hours, and we don't. You know, I don't think people want to listen to us harp on about it. But just to slowly like close it off, the initial question being slow incremental stages rather than a really divisive piece of legislation that nobody's really happy with.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to say is that I'm not trying to say that we should have like all these hoops to jump through where it feels like you're bound and gagged and you can't breathe. I think it can be done in a very, very sensible way that actually offers you like protections and allows you to operate in the way that you want to freely without this dirty underbelly way of the industry that exists that no one wants to talk about. But I think that rather than being like no legislation, this is the wild wild west. If you took the reins and were like, well, can we do this today? Yeah, can we implement this? What about this? What about this? And you took the approach of we're gonna be the ones that say, well, can we add this? Can we add this? The government actually doesn't want to spend money. I mean, like the thing with the dogs, like the they can't even do the thing they did with the freaking bully breeds. Like they can't afford it, and nor do they have the infrastructure to even implement it. Like it's a mess right now. So to think that they're going to be able to just they even want to be like, all right, we are going to implement a positive list. Like that is such an undertaking that they'd rather avoid if you did the work for them, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. So we've mentioned positive list and whitelist and whatnot, and obviously positive list and whitelist are two of the same thing. But a lot of my viewers are quite new to it and probably won't understand what a positive list or a whitelist is. Do you want to explain what one of these is?
Yeah, so a positive list is like they put out a list of animals that you can keep, and if you're not keeping something on that list, it's illegal. So rather than be like so it's a blacklist with the dogs, right? You can't have your Argentinos, you can't have your pit bulls. That's the blacklist, and then everything else is fine. It's a reverse. It would be like a list of what you can have, and if it's not on there, it's illegal. That's what a positive list is. Um, I don't agree with a positive list because I think that it just causes welfare problems. I think that a lot of people that would have things on the sly wouldn't be able to take to a vet then, so the animal wouldn't be able to have veterinary care. Um, People wouldn't be able to share resources about how to keep this animal or research into it or to actually help our understanding of progressing care to try and achieve higher welfare. And I think that it's just going to send a lot of things like underground, like in Norway did, where they tried to implement a positive list and they just went underground. And then years later, they were like, oh, well, we can't control it. Might as well just make it okay again. So I don't think it works. And I don't approve of it. I would approve of it if it, in a magical fantasy world, it would work, where it was like a list of like 500 species and it works. And that means that the vets can concentrate on learning how to look after these species and everything like elevates and like it actually gets a better system for everyone. But it's not going to happen. Not going to happen because well, we went to Denmark to speak at a conference and we were speaking to the society there, and they were like, I was like, so what's it like over here? Because they were in like mainland Europe, obviously. So I was like, what's the rules here? They're like, we can have everything apart from giant snakes and venomous. And I was like, so giant snakes, where's the threshold? So it was like berms, retics, anacondas, um, afrox and stuff. And then they could have bolini, they could have boas, they could have scrubs. And I'm like, okay, makes sense. And they were like, and we can't have venomous. And they were like, makes total sense. And we're all fine with it. And I was like, really? So was it a backlash? It was just, yeah, they were like, there was backlash from some people, but the majority of us were like, makes sense. So I think if anything, if you put a gun to my head, I would say, okay, blacklist. But I actually just don't want anything at all. And I just wish people just were sensible and we governed ourselves, but we don't. We don't. Not to the degree that we say we do. Yeah, I wish we had a bit more infrastructure. And it's the thing, right? Like the shops have been saying for years, like we want to be more people in the industry, more people in the industry, more pet keepers, more reptile keepers. And now it's that stage where it's like it's more popular than the guinea pigs and like rabbits. And now we're at a stage where it's like this is a major industry. And then it's like, okay, so the world turns around and it's like, okay, so let's put in some infrastructure and some legislation here so it's not so wild westy. And then we're like, no. And I'm like, but that's what you were pushing for and building towards for years. Did you not think once the industry got to a certain size, it would need to be like
Policed.
have a bit of infrastructure to it? I'm just confused by that dynamic where people thought that they were gonna be a really popular like pet like, up there with just after cats and dogs, and then not have any, as if it's still like a few private keepers and there's no one even cares about what you're doing. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, personally, to me, like I am dead against a positive list, dead against it. but potentially not for the reasons that a lot of people might think so. Like, oh, it's going to limit the amount of like reptiles and stuff like that. Like, yeah, arguably that's a part of it, but when I look at it and I look what comes through my doors as rescues, and I look what come through the doors, the NCRW, when obviously they post their bits and bobs, and other shops that we're quite friendly with, etc., etc. It's mainly royal pythons, corn snakes, leopard geckos, crested geckos, bearded dragons. Those five species would be on that positive list. So what are you doing? Like within that, I mean, we've been here 9 years, right? And the only oddity that's come in as a rescue case, really, are recently, actually, to be quite fair, and that was a false water cobra and a green anaconda. There are some like other like retics and a berm and whatnot, but as a whole, it's it's not what would be banned, if that makes sense. Like, I think one false water cobra that's coming on rescue over a span of 9 years, I think is pretty. It's a good statistic, to be quite fair, compared to since March. We've had 58 leopard geckos through our doors. We've had over 100 royal pythons through the doors. Not so many beardies, to be quite fair. 4 crested geckos, but it's mainly royals and leos. But again, those would be on there. I am a proponent for a blacklist, or I would probably. I don't like the connotation that surrounds the word blacklist because it automatically conjures up these things like, oh, it's bad, it's this, it's that. It's not these animals' fault at the end of the day. What I would prefer to call it would be a common sense list. You know, like, am I realistically going to be able to house this Burmese python long term? Like, when it is in excess of like 18 foot, am I going to be able to house this? Am I going to be able to house this anaconda? I mean, I think some zoos can't do anacondas appropriately and do them justice. So how's Joe Bloggs in his terraced house going to do that? You know, so yeah, it's an interesting topic, but I do like your view of the slow incremental changes, just to try and push it just a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And I would find it very difficult if people were to still call you an anti when you're like, no, I still really want to keep these species, but let's do it in a bit more of a sensible way and bring everybody in together and not exclude certain groups out of that.
I mean, I feel like we're going to get there anyway, right? Like people might be like, I don't want to provide UVB right now because I've got a rack that's the type of rack in the form of rack that's only available right now, right? But let's say they made like a new version of a rack that could allow you to implement UVB in a practical and safe way. Well, people that have had like a single snake for like the past 5 years and they've got like breeding records of it. Let's say that by having UVB available and the opportunity to bask and the endorphins that get released in the skin in response to the UVB light, they become more relaxed. They um, become less stressed. So that during that time of breeding, stress levels become reduced. And then you might have less problems with, you know, stress around breeding time. Or let's say that you normally double clutch and you have a clutch of 10 in this king snake's clutch, but your second clutch you'll have like 9, right? But actually, when the eggs do come out, they are like beautifully pearly white and they've got a lot of calcium there because that vitamin D allowed them to metabolize more of the calcium that was in their diets and put it into putting it on the eggs. Or let's say the babies come out more virile and they're just like healthier and more robust because it's they have ad libitum constant access to vitamin D, and loads of it is poured into the albumin and the embryo of the developing egg, and she's still making more in her body, so she doesn't get depleted, and it's like da, 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 da. And then actually you might find that she recovers faster by having the UVB, and you actually have 10 first clutch and 10 second clutch. So actually you just gained a baby. So the cost of buying that UVB and the cost of running that UVB has made you more in your breeding efforts, maybe even prolonged the amount of clutches you'll get in the future and the longevity of that breeding female and the money you'll make from the amount of numbers in the clutch because you just stuck a light over it. Like for this, if you are like, I'm a hardcore breeder, I'm taking this very seriously. Like there are tools like that that like it's basically you could basically consider it a breeding light. Like how could you not put the breeding light on it? You know, so when people start getting that opportunity to have the racks like start getting bigger and bigger and more complex, and they start putting the lighting, their past data of like long clutches of different females, and then they start experimenting, they'll find, hang on, this is happening, or maybe it's not happening, but maybe your female just recovers in between clutches, so she doesn't look so bloody knackered in between double clutching or something. Like it could be as simple as just better recovery and longevity of a breeding female. Could be as simple as that. That's worth it money wise.
Yeah, I would agree.
As the ages progress and it becomes more and more like why aren't you providing UVB and people start trying it and becomes more accessible to them in the way they're doing it in an industrialized manner, I think things are going to change anyway. And people will just have like the breeding light on their snakes. Because like for me, I have always put UVB on my pair of Mexican blacks. So let's say that I bred them, well, that clutch number or like what I'm seeing is like from her having always having UVB. I don't have past year's data without it. But if those people have like loads and loads of records, you're the perfect person to experiment and see what you can get out of it. Go play. Like this is as much as a hobby as it is a business. Why aren't you just playing? The bulbs aren't that expensive.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, yeah, they're not that bad. Not compared to how much they used to be back in the day. Used to be quite expensive. But yeah, but anyway, let's move on because I think again we can have a stupidly long conversation about about welfare and whatnot. But let's go on to back onto your YouTube channel and your future direction. So, what future goals have you got, like for your channel, and any like personal goals in general that would potentially be outside of that channel as well?
Grow as big as possible, help as many people as possible, make as much money as possible.
Okay, and we're done. No, joking.
But for like obviously one of the reasons I started it is that I wanted to make money out of my hobby so that it would also pay for itself. But I didn't want to do it in a way that like I would cram a load of animals into my room and I wanted to compromise in the way that I wanted to keep. So doing the YouTube channel was the way that I saw that I could do that. Um, and also I just want to help as many people as possible. Like there's so much research that we need to do. If I had a lot of money, I could spend a lot of money on research. Obviously, I'd want to buy a house and sort myself out first, stabilize myself, secure my future, and then spend money on research and stuff. But I would love to do that. So yeah, simple answer: grow as big as possible, help as many as people as possible, have as big of a reach as possible, be as helpful as possible, make as much money as possible, and do it until I can't do it anymore.
Until the wheels fall off.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at people like Tom Crutchfield. And I'm like, "Oh, if I'm there at 70 to like getting on 80, and I'm still doing this, and I'm still being of service to, which is the irony is of like people view me as an anti when the thing that I tell myself is like being of service to culture. So I'm in a complete different mindset than the label people try to put on me, which is bizarre how this has happened. But there you go. But yeah, that's how I feel.
So, a bit more of a personal insight on this one. Um, is there like a specific moment, like working, being in the industry, in your career in general, that's like really profoundly like influenced your perspective on a certain topic?
There was an example of a snake that we've got now where it wouldn't eat, right? And it was getting skinnier and skinnier, and it was becoming like a Toblerone. Like the spine was showing and protruding, and it was getting very triangular. And I was like, okay, so what have we tried? And it was like, well, rats. And I'm like, okay, have we how have we provided the rats? And it was like, okay, we're just dangling it in front of it, trying to get it to eat, right? And it was a smack it in the face, trying to get it to like angrily grab it in response. And all of the stuff from the welfare and behavioral stuff like clicked in that moment. I was like, well, why don't we try like a day old chick? I popped it in the enclosure, walked away, come back, and it was eating. So I gave it another one and ate both. So in hindsight, I was looking at it, I think that it was kept in a way that it wasn't given much security, and it was very exposed. There was no hide or anything, and then it was being smacked with the rat. So maybe even just like coming in with the tongs in front of it and like imposing it above it as you're like working was a bit much, and it was like whoa. So maybe just dropping that rat and just done that would have worked, or maybe because it was smacking with that and the behavioral side of like learned associated that rat meant I'm gonna get smacked, and I don't like that punishment. So I would like, and like when you go to work with me, you're like in a ball, like tightest ball in a ball python I've ever seen, completely fearful, right? And that simple thing of being like, we'll just offer a day or check and see what happens. Like it was just a completely different animal. Now we've got it now. Ellie has it in her reptile room in like a 4x2. It has branches on the wall and like hanging like log tubes on the ceiling. And it'll sit in an ambush in that position. And she can come in and feed it on the tongs and it'll take it in the ambush and eat right in front of you. Complete different animal. So just applying all that behavioral science and the understanding of like and how you can like work with them and not like impose yourself on them and just take it very slowly. Again, my views on the legislation of like working very slowly with the animal, and now we've got to a point where like, it's a completely different animal. That sort of old school, like it will do what I want. I want to eat the rats because I don't want it to eat anything else. Because again, there's the folklore of like if it eats something else, it's going to get stuck on it and it won't eat the rats. The only reason people want to eat the rats is because that's what I've got available to me. That's most convenient. But in actuality, like the nutritional composition of a day-old chick is like the equivalent of an adult mouse or adult mouse. So what's the difference between feeding like 3 day-old chicks to the caloric value of one rat? And then you can like experiment and get it to eat other things and stuff. But like that was the biggest thing of like, oh my God, like no one understands the behavior here. Then there's like a whole thing that we need to like work on. That was a big moment, I think. It wasn't like I knew it. It was like I saw something. I was like, right, I need to go learn this so that I can like figure it out and help other people.
Yeah.
So like it was like me knowing and reflecting upon it now, that explanation. But at the time, I was just like, it likes chicks is about as far as I got. But now I'm looking back, and I'm like, oh, okay, this and that. So I knew I needed to figure that out to try and help other people with it. People get into like really dogmatic lens of thought, right? And the biggest example that I found was like I helped someone with well, I tried to help someone with their royal in Iraq, right? They had their royal python in a rack that was like very tight and compact, and that royal python would curl up in its like little of a coil, and it would be hugged by all sides in the rack, right? So she then upgraded it to a larger size because she was like, it's time to upgrade the size of the rack, and then she moved it to a size where it wasn't tight and compact, and it wasn't hugged by all the walls, and it was just sat in the middle without that um stigmataxis around it, right? So I said, offer it a hide and you can replace what you lost with the upgrade. And her response was, the rack is the hide. But that is something that had been like shoved into her brain of like rack is hide, therefore I don't need to spend money. And it's something I really think that that would have been a good solution of giving that feelings of security back to the animal that had before, then maybe she would get the results that she wanted. But she didn't, it wasn't even willing to try it because the rack is the hide. And that is something that other people had put dogma into her head and that forced her into this very narrow lane of thought that she couldn't even think outside the box.
Was she a relatively new keeper?
I think so.
Don't think so.
No.
So, well, speaking of, I've just mentioned it, new keepers. What advice would you give to like new keepers? Say they've just got their reptile, or they're thinking about getting a reptile. Obviously, as arguably, it's going to depend on like the species in general that they're thinking about getting. But what advice would you give to people?
I would say with lighting, the proper scientific way to do it is to try and replicate sunlight or represent its wavelengths. And that is already like terminology for a beginner. It's like, whoa. But what I'm saying is that the sun and its composition is the same for no matter what animal uses it in the world. So if you learn how to at least do lighting to a level that represents the sun's composition, it's the same for every single animal. The only thing that changes is how intense you make it. So if you can learn lighting, you can basically learn how to light every single animal. Because all you're doing is giving the sun to every single animal in a way that they might use it. So if it's crepuscular, you'd give a less intense version. If it's a midday basker, it would be a lot more intense than what you're providing. But the way you're setting it up and like what wavelengths you're trying to make is basically the same every time. You just do it in a less or more intense way.
What about animals that are like thermoconforming? Because I see a lot of people don't offer basking spots and whatnot for these animals that are thermoconforming.
There's very few animals that are actually thermoconformers to the point that they won't like shuffle in and out of like opportunities like radiation, right? So let's say you've got in a forest, you've got something like a Boyd's forest dragon. They still shuffle in and out of exposure to the lighting equipment. So even though they might be considered a thermoconformer, they aren't really. So a
Hmm.
lot of frogs would be considered thermoconformers, but a lot of them would move in and out of like lighting.
Yeah. To be fair, I noticed that with the white tree frogs that we've literally got in this one here. In fact, they're under the basking spot right now.
I think what I would say is provide it anyway, provide it in a way that is safe, so you're not doing it in an overexposure or overly intense, and there are opportunities to move away from it, and then just watch what it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's all you. I mean, all you're doing is like spending pennies on running those lights. Yeah, you might have to spend the outlay on buying them. Um, but if you're going to keep something for its entire lifespan, if that lifespan's like 15 years, just like, isn't it worth it to just try and do your best for 15 years? It's a long time. Like, actually, to answer your question, an impactful conversation that I've had recently that's been like, whoa for me is a conversation with Tom Griffiths when I was around his house last night, giving UVB to axolotls. You
Oh,
can put a solar meter, is what he told me, a solar meter in a Ziploc bag. And because the UV goes through the Ziploc bag, you can use the solar meter underwater. Boom! My brain was like, whoa. And I'm like, oh my God. Imagine like when you're measuring for turtles and stuff. Oh my God. Like I just didn't even think about that.
So what was his thing? Recommending using UVB for axolotls?
Yeah, I mean, in the so like UVB doesn't actually like dissipate and like is like 2 weeks. It's like 8 feet down. Like so, like coral. It was we were in like an aquatics place, and he was having a discussion with the guy that works there about like how corals actually have metabolic bone disease. A lot of them do. So like the ones that were like the wild ones were like really rock hard, and a lot of the corals that like bred in captivity was they're not giving UVB are like really soft and spongy, and you can really easily break them. And that's because a lot of them are in like shallow areas of like your face is what a face that I was making of like reefs and stuff that are like within 8 feet of the surface, and they're like they get metabolic bone disease because they haven't got UVB. So the really old school style lamps, the halides, actually had UVB in them that they were using for corals. And people have changed to like different LEDs and stuff for like blue light and that, and it's actually like considered a welfare problem in like zoos and stuff on the consultancy that he does. I was there like, whoa, what are you talking about, man? So then I was like,
no.
how would you measure it? Yeah, and then he was like, how would you measure it? And he's like, just put it in a Ziploc bag, and I'm like, what? So yeah, so now my brain's just like, imagine the axolotls. What is annoying is that when I was at university and we were talking about like fish during the fish module, and I was like, well, why don't we give UVB to like fish? Because I've seen koi or like carp in like a pond near me. They would always, when it's sunny, they would come and sit at the surface. I was like, I'm pretty sure they're like basking, right? And they're like, no, they don't bask. That's stupid, and like shut me off. Now, years later, I'm like, I was right. I was bloody right. I'm like, oh my God. So like imagine like UVB for like fish and stuff. Like now I'm like, and you can measure it by using a solar meter in like a Ziploc bag. Bah! So that yeah, that's an impactful one. Like my brain's spinning after that one last night.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in no way, stretch or form am I even remote. I've not kept fish for quite some time now, but that's phenomenal. I mean, when it comes to like fish and stuff, I do know that coloration for a lot of captive bred species tend to be a lot more dull compared to the wild counterparts. So, but obviously, I'm not saying it is. So, whoever's watching this that's into fish, don't jump down my throat. But what you're potentially saying is that the UVB could have an impact on that potentially. That's absolutely crazy. I did not know that corals could get metabolic bone disease. That is absolutely phenomenal. Well, not phenomenal that they can get it. Obviously not. It's awful. Or that they can get metabolic bone disease, but yeah. And there's something as a Ziploc bag as well for a solar meter in the water. That's great. That's great.
I would probably double Ziploc it just because I know I would not seal it properly and it would leak and I would panic.
Oh
So I would
yeah.
like double do it, but yeah.
So just before I'll let you go. Got a couple more things to go through just before I let you go off and do reptile bits and stuff. In terms of the community, have you generally had a like positive interaction with it rather than obviously the negative? Because I think it's quite easy in general to have the negatives and have them at like the forefront of your mind and stuff like that. Like for me personally, I've been on the receiving end of quite a lot of negativity. I'm quite active on my own personal social media with the shop where I am, and I've had quite a few bits of nasty comments. I've had nasty comments on my YouTube videos as well. That one that I read out to you the other week, which I found absolutely phenomenal. But yeah, positivity. What positive aspects of the community do you really like?
I really like when you go to like a conference or something, and it's like or a trade show or something like that. And it's everyone's there is like on the same wavelength, and then like you're just buzzing, and you come away and you go to like dinner after it and stuff, and you hang out all night, and then you come away from it just like completely energized, and like your faith in humanity replenished, and it's just like you can't get a feeling like it, and it's like I love the concept of ikigai. It's like your occupation, your sense of purpose, and what you're really good at. And then like in the Venn diagram, when it overlaps, it's like your ikigai, your telos, your purpose, and like who you are, your essence. And I feel like a lot of people um feel that way, and we're all just on a wavelength, and it's a bit of a buzz. Like I love that. That I love. Like even just like helping people, you know that some people that you've helped like go on to like feel that, and I can't explain it. I
Mm.
can't explain the sense of purpose I have derived from doing what I do now. Like I'm a completely different person. The happiness levels that I have in my life now is like I am my baseline. I would say my baseline is happy.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's nice. I think for because I've been keeping reptiles for quite a long time now. I think the positive thing for me, and it's happened more recently, to be quite fair, because I I kind of shut myself away for quite a long time, because I just didn't like how toxic and vile it was. And when I eventually opened myself up to like the community and whatnot more recently in the past like 5 or so years and whatnot, I've made some really good friends like from it. um and like obviously like you for example, like we go down south and you come up here and whatnot, and like yeah, and like we go to zoos and then have a bit of a zoo debrief and just do geeky things like that. Because like round here as well, like in terms of my friends, I don't have any friends. Period. No joking. I don't have any friends that are like really like into like reptiles and stuff like that. So it's nice to express that like externally. So I do like that. Do like that sense of belonging.
It's that sense of community that like well we're social species, so we're genetically pre-positioned to like or predisposed to like gravitate towards that. And obviously, like there's that paper that talks about like there's a gene that makes someone like want to care or be around or care for animals because like evolutionary speaking, you'd have like the people that would be like raising livestock and things like that for like a survival mechanic, and they identified a gene that is a reason why people are like drawn to it. So if people are like, I don't understand why I feel this way, I just do. I don't understand why I my entire life revolves around animals, and then other people don't even take a second glance at them. It's probably genetic. You probably have a gene that makes you. So when you're in a room with people that are all like that, then of course you feel a sense of belonging to one another, I'd say. But that's how I feel, even though I'm an auntie.
Right then. So, and finally, to round this off, we've got a previous guest question. So, our previous guest that we had on, I asked her to give a question that she didn't know that obviously it was going to be you that was answering it. But if you had money, time, and health, what project would you like to embark on, or what skill would you like to develop?
I'd start a reptile brand.
You'd start a reptile brand.
I'd start a reptile brand that's like hard. If I had infinite money,
Yeah, yeah. Money, health, time, anything.
oh, if I had infinite money, I'd start a reptile brand that made just the best products, even at a loss. That is just like ridiculously good. So a lot of like the lighting stuff or the LED UV, a lot of the reasons why we can't make it as good as it could be is because a lot of the chips are really expensive to make. But if I had infinite money and I could just run it at a loss, I would just make monster pieces of equipment for like dirt cheap. And then pay for like loads of research to make the best gut loader. Like I would just go nuts. Because again, like all I want is to like help as many individual animals as possible. Like when I say all I care about is welfare, it's like literal. So like even if I was rich, I would still do what I'm doing now, but just go mad with it.
Just go proper balls to the wall,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
yeah, just try and uplift as many animals out of abject poor welfare situations as humanly possible.
Yeah, like I said, like I derive like such a sense of purpose from this. So having money would like if I didn't do it, it would take that sense of purpose away from me. I mean, like I'm genetically predisposed probably. It's like I can't get away from it. So what else would I do?
To be fair, that's exactly how I feel. Like I don't know what else I would be doing other than this. I really don't. I've not got a clue. It's just been something for me that I've just been drawn to from such a young age as well. Like it's yeah, it's just one of those things. But yeah, right. Well, anyway, thank you very much for your time, Liam.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problems. If you've got any final thoughts, say your piece.
I hope that anyone that like generally thinks I'm an anti, or is one of those people that we spoke about today that was like, oh yeah, Liam's an anti. If they watch this, they'll be like, okay, fair. Maybe that was a bit dumb.
Right, anyway, like we said, thank you very much. And thank you everybody at home for watching. And we'll see you in the next one. Ta-ra. And that wraps us up for this episode. So big thank you to Liam from Reptiles and Research. What I'll do, if you're not already subscribed, I mean, you probably will be. If you subscribe to me, then you're more than likely to subscribe to Liam. But I'll pop his channel in the description down below, so you can definitely go and check them out. If you have any suggestions of other people that you'd like me to interview, please let me know. You can email us, you can Facebook message us, you can pop it in the comment section down below. But yeah, with that being said, we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.